Glass shatters. Somewhere inside the castle, something has just been broken to pieces. And no one screams. There are corridors that have never seen the sun. Cold stone underfoot. Darkness at both ends, so thick it swallows the very sound of breathing. A woman presses herself against the wall, a basket of dried roses clutched tight to her chest. Someone is looking for her, or for the thing she just happened to walk past. Then, footsteps. From both directions, at once. One set behind her, heavy, deliberate. One set ahead, racing forward with the speed of a man who has only seconds left to live. She has no time to choose a direction. The man from ahead rounds the corner. His hand seizes her face. Behind her, the expensive leather boots stop dead. Half a second. Absolute silence. As if the whole world were listening to hear who would breathe first. Within these walls, people learn to become invisible to survive. But tonight, someone has decided that invisible is not enough. A drop of blood falls to the stone floor. It is not hers. She took the wrong corridor. That was all it was. A left instead of a right at the portrait gallery junction. And suddenly, the marble floors gave way to cold stone. The orange blossom scent dissolved into candle wax and old air. And Ren Calloway was standing in a narrow servant's passage, holding a basket of pressed floral arrangements with absolutely nowhere to be. She stopped. She turned. The passage stretched in both directions. Dark at both ends. The kind of dark that had been dark for 100 years and had no intention of changing. Move. You should move. Why aren't you moving? She pressed herself against the wall. Pure instinct. The basket went to her chest like a shield, which was ridiculous because pressed roses were not a shield, and she was a companion, not a soldier. And the most dangerous thing about this corridor was that she was already 3 minutes late, delivering these flowers to the bridal suite, and Lady Dunmore was going to notice. Lady Dunmore noticed everything. Which was, if Ren was honest, somewhat ironic given the current situation, and then she heard them. Footsteps, 2 sets, coming from opposite directions, both moving fast, both purposeful, both getting louder with the specific urgency of people who had somewhere to be and intended to be there. One from behind her, one from ahead. Pick a direction. Any direction. Just. The man from ahead rounded the corner at speed, and the world stopped doing what it was supposed to do. He was tall, dark coat, no embellishment. The kind of simplicity that cost considerably more than ornamentation, the kind that said, I don't need to announce myself because every room I enter already knows. Eyes the color of winter water. Not blue, not gray. Something between the two that had no polite name for it. He moved the way certain men moved. Like the space around him was his by right, and he simply hadn't gotten around to formally claiming all of it yet. He didn't slow down. He didn't hesitate. His hand came to her jaw, tilted her face up, and his mouth came down on hers. Not gently, not softly, with the controlled, absolute pressure of a man who had made a decision in approximately 1/3 of a second and was committing to it entirely. Ren froze. The basket crunched between them. She felt the petals of 3 carefully arranged roses give way with a soft, helpless sound. A little botanical tragedy happening against both their chests while her brain attempted to locate itself. He is kissing you. You don't know this man. He is still kissing you, the roses. His hand did not shake. His breath did not falter. He kissed her the way that existed in the gap between calculation and instinct. As if the decision had been made somewhere deeper than thought, and the rest of him was simply following orders. The footsteps from behind her passed. Heavy boots. Deliberate. Searching. They paused 1 terrible half-second, then moved on down the corridor. He released her, stepped back exactly 2 inches. No more, and looked at her, those eyes, calm as stone. As if he had not just kissed a complete stranger in a servant's corridor without asking her name first. As if this were a perfectly reasonable Tuesday. Forgive me. His voice was low, unhurried. The voice of a man accustomed to being listened to rather than argued with. Ren stared at him. She was not, by any definition, a woman who lost words. She managed a difficult household. She negotiated with florists and footmen, and ladies-in-waiting with sharp elbows and sharper opinions. She had once redirected an entire dinner seating arrangement, using nothing but a well-placed suggestion and a calm expression. And the specific social knowledge that Lord Fenmore and Sir Briggs could not be within visible distance of each other without something expensive breaking. She was not the kind of woman who stood mute in corridors. And yet think. You are a thinking person. Think because she had recognized him. Not by acquaintance. Not by introduction. by the portrait she'd passed 40 minutes earlier on her way to the wrong turn. The third painting in the East Gallery, the one hung at a slightly wrong angles so the afternoon light fell across it awkwardly, which had bothered her on behalf of whoever had painted it. High cheekbones. Controlled severity. Dark green coat, bearing a crest she'd since seen pressed in gold on every formal invitation card for this wedding, Callum Vance. The most powerful vassal in the Aldenmere dukedom. The man Parliament adjusted its schedule around. The man whose name appeared in 3 separate newspaper columns every week, without him appearing to seek a single one of them. The man whom Lady Dunmore's mother had sighed over, before quickly declaring him entirely unobtainable and absolutely not suitable and frankly too intimidating to be worth the trouble. He was watching her now, with an expression that was not quite an apology, not quite anything she had a word for, the man who passed, she said, when she finally found herself again. He was looking for you, a pause. Yes, he had Thornmere livery. The crest on his ring, something shifted in his expression, just fractionally. The way a very still surface shifts when something moves beneath it. You notice that. I notice most things. A beat. It is my profession. He looked at her then. Not the way men usually looked at women in these corridors. The assessing, categorizing, ultimately dismissing gaze of someone sorting people into useful and irrelevant. This was something else. This had the quality of attention that felt more like reading. Careful. Thorough. The way you looked at something when you wanted to actually understand it, rather than simply identify it. And what is your profession exactly? Invisibility, Ren said. He almost smiled. The faintest suggestion at the left corner of his mouth before his expression settled back into its cool, composed lines. Then I would advise, he said, that you practice it more thoroughly. For the next few minutes, he straightened his coat. One smooth motion. Go back the way you came. Don't mention this corridor to anyone. And he was gone, same swift, silent certainty with which he'd arrived. Around the corner, down the passage she'd originally intended to take, and then nothing. Just the faint sound of expensive boot leather on cold stone, getting quieter. Ren stood there for a full 30 seconds. Then she adjusted the basket, straightened her spine, and walked in the opposite direction. She did not think about the kiss. She thought about it continuously for the next 4 hours. The wedding ceremony of Lord and Lady Dunmore was magnificent in the specific, aggressive way that Thornmere events were always magnificent. As if beauty had been mandated rather than cultivated. As if the castle itself had opinions about aesthetics and enforced them with quiet authority. The chapel held 200 guests. Ren sat in the 3rd row of the companions' gallery, the elevated side section reserved for the essential invisible people who kept the gentry's lives running smoothly and silently, and without any acknowledgement whatsoever. She had a clear view of the ceremony, a professional view, the kind designed for watching without being watched. She told herself she was watching the bride. Lady Dunmore was radiant. 12 feet of Bruges lace with seed pearls, every single one of which Ren had personally verified was correctly positioned that morning. A task that had taken 2 hours and would be credited to no one. The dress was extraordinary. The veil was extraordinary. The flowers, specifically, the ones not currently crushed against someone's chest in a servant's corridor, were extraordinary. Ren watched the flowers. She watched the officiating clergyman's left hand, which trembled slightly, which was interesting. She watched the way Lord Dunmore looked at his bride with an expression so unguarded it was almost embarrassing. The pure, uncomplicated happiness of a man who understood exactly how fortunate he was and intended to spend the rest of his life being aware of it. She did not look at the 2nd row of the main floor, Aldenmere side, except. He turned his head, at the precise angle required to look up at the companions' gallery. His gaze moved along the row, unhurried, deliberate, the sweep of a man who looked at things the way he did everything else, with complete intention. And then it found her. Ren did not look away in time. For exactly 3 seconds, across a chapel full of 200 people, and one extraordinary bride and 12 feet of Bruges lace, they looked at each other 3 seconds, which was, she would later reflect, approximately the same duration as the corridor. Then the organ rose into the recessional. The congregation stood. And when Ren looked again, Callum Vance had already turned forward, his profile perfect and unreadable as something carved from the same stone as the chapel walls. She spent the reception doing her job, which, was the correct thing to do. The only thing to do. She fetched Lady Dunmore's fan when the heat of 300 candles became too much. She reminded Lord Dunmore's elderly uncle, Sir Percival, which guests he had already greeted and which still required his attention. Because Sir Percival had the charming social habit of introducing himself to the same person 3 times in an evening, with complete and utter sincerity. She quietly redirected the seating arrangement in the east dining room. When it became apparent that Lord Fenmore and Sir Briggs had somehow ended up 3 chairs apart, in spite of every precaution, which required a conversation with the head footman, 2 strategic suggestions, and the polite but firm relocation of a flower arrangement to create a visual barrier, 4 minutes. No disruption. No one noticed. This was her skill. Not brilliance, not beauty, not the social currency that moved through these rooms like weather. Just attention. Patience. The particular talent of someone who had learned to see exactly what was happening in a room, because she had never, not once in her career, been expected to be part of it. She did not see Callum Vance for the first 2 hours, and then she did. He was standing near the long windows of the grand salon, a group of men around him, the kind of collective consequence that was visible from across a room, the kind around which everyone else unconsciously arranged themselves at a slightly wider radius, like planets adjusting their orbits around an undeclared sun. He stood at the center of it, still. The way he was still in everything. Don't stop walking. She was halfway across the room. Message from Lady Dunmore to the catering supervisor. 1 more invisible task in an invisible evening. She should have been looking at the path ahead. She was not looking at the path ahead. And he found her before she found him, across 30 feet of magnificent carpet, and the soft, continuous roar of 200 conversations. He looked directly at her, as if she had announced herself somehow, as if being invisible had, this once, simply failed to work. Walk. You are walking. This is what walking looks like. He said something to the men around him. Brief, without breaking eye contact. The circle around him shifted, adjusted, reformed around his absence, and Callum Vance began to cross the room. Ren started walking again immediately. She had a message to deliver. She had a job. She was not the kind of woman who stood frozen in reception rooms waiting for powerful men to cross distances toward her. She was the kind of woman who moved efficiently from one task to the next and kept the machinery of other people's lives running and did not become the subject of anyone's attention. She delivered the message. She received the supervisor's response. She turned. He was directly behind her. You move quickly, he said. I am employed to move quickly. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be, which she filed away as something to examine later, when she had time for examining things, and quietly, a pause. I'm told you rearranged the east dining room seating in under 4 minutes this afternoon without causing any visible disruption. Ren looked at him. Someone told you that. I pay attention to people who solve problems without creating new ones. He held her gaze. It is rarer than it should be. She studied him for a moment. In the fuller light of the salon, he was both more and less than the man from the corridor. More, because she could see the full scope of him, now, the height, the quality of stillness, the way every person within 10 feet seemed to be unconsciously aware of his presence without directly looking at him. Less, because she could also see something she hadn't caught in the corridor's dimness. Something in his expression that wasn't warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that suggested the composure he wore had been built over something warmer, and the building had cost him, and he had decided it was worth the cost but hadn't entirely stopped paying. What do you want? Your Grace? She asked. A pause. A very small shift in his expression. Surprise. He managed it quickly. She suspected people did not often ask him things directly, but she caught it before it disappeared. Your name, he said. Ren Calloway. Miss Calloway. He said it as though weighing it, testing the balance of it. I owe you an apology. What I did in the corridor was necessary, she said. The man who passed was Steward Pell, Thornmere's household steward. She paused. He had no reason to be in that part of the castle today. Not during the ceremony preparations. Callum Vance went very still. You recognized him, I told you. I noticed things. What else did you notice? She looked at him. Around them, the party continued its splendid, oblivious roar. No one was paying attention to them. She was too invisible, and he was too expected for anyone to find their conversation remarkable. He walked that corridor twice, she said. I heard his footsteps before the ceremony, the same distinctive pattern, the same measured pace. He wasn't passing through, he was searching, systematically. The way you search when you have a specific location in mind and haven't found what you're looking for yet. Callum held her gaze. You deduced all of that from footsteps, and the direction he was walking, and the timing, and the fact that the only person who would have known your precise route through that part of the castle was someone with access to your personal itinerary. She waited. Someone arranged your accommodations for this visit? His jaw tightened. Just fractionally, the Thornmere household office, he said, which Pell oversees. Then Pell knew exactly where you would be and when. She met his eyes. You were careful, Your Grace. But someone told Pell which corridor to check. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the silence of a man being handed something he had half suspected and found worse now that it was confirmed. May I send you a card? He asked. The shift was so complete, from the quiet tension of the last 30 seconds to this, that it took her a full beat to catch up. I beg your pardon? A social card. Requesting the pleasure of your company for tea, or some equivalent arrangement. A pause. He seemed aware, just barely, of the incongruity. I recognize that the sequence of events between our introduction and this request is somewhat reversed from convention. Somewhat, Ren agreed. I would like to speak with you further. Not here, not with 200 people present. His voice was quiet. The things you've noticed today may be relevant to a matter I've been concerned with for some time. She looked at him steadily. Is this a professional request or a personal one? He held her gaze. Both, he said. If you're willing, Ren synthesized this for 3 full seconds, which was, she would later reflect, precisely 3 seconds longer than it had taken her to actually decide. Send the card, she said. She walked away before he could respond. She did not look back. She was good at walking away first. It cost nothing. It gave nothing away. She had learned that early and practiced it reliably for 10 years. What she had not learned, and was currently discovering with some alarm, was what to do when walking away didn't work. When the thing you were walking away from simply came with you. The card arrived the following morning. She had prepared herself for formal language, precise phrasing. The kind of social correspondence that communicated interest without admitting it, that said everything through what it carefully left unsaid, that was composed by a secretary and reviewed by the sender, and revised for propriety and sent through the appropriate channels with the appropriate delay to suggest appropriate disinterest. What she received was this. There is a man who does not wish me well, and after last evening I believe you may be the most observant person currently inside Thornmere Castle. I would like your help with a matter that requires precisely that. I would also, separately and without strategic motivation, like to have tea with you. CV. She read it twice, then she sat down, which she did not do in the middle of the morning. The morning was for moving. For the 14 small tasks that kept Lady Dunmore's days running smoothly and silently and without incident. He wrote it himself. Not dictated to Greaves, his secretary. Not formatted through the household correspondence system. His own handwriting. Controlled but not practiced, in the way of a man who wrote his own letters often. The careful hand of someone who had made a decision and was committing to it without the buffer of professional assistance. 2 honest things. That there was a problem. And that he wanted tea. In her experience, powerful men were not often honest. They were strategic, they were charming. They were persuasive in the way of men who had learned early that what people wanted to hear was almost always more useful than what was actually true. She had managed earls and countesses. She had managed foreign dignitaries who did not believe the word no applied to them. She had managed Lady Dunmore's mother, which was widely considered the most challenging domestic assignment in 3 counties. She wrote back, I am available at 11. The castle has a south-facing garden room on the lower east corridor, currently unoccupied through the midday hours. I would suggest that location over a public tea room, given the nature of what you've described. WC. She gave it to her own footman to deliver, and spent the next 3 hours doing her job with complete professional composure and an internal monologue that was considerably less composed. He arrived at 11 exactly. She had half expected him to seem different in a smaller room. Less imposing, perhaps. More human. The grand salon had a way of amplifying presence. All that space, all those people unconsciously arranging themselves around consequence. in a modest room with potted citrus trees and white-painted furniture. Perhaps the Duke's most powerful vassal would simply be a man. He was not simply a man. He occupied the room the way weather occupied space. You were aware of him without deciding to be. The garden room was generous, ceilings high enough, windows wide enough, and he was still somehow too present for all of it. Not in a way you could point to specifically, just in the way of certain people who carry their authority not in their posture or their voice but somewhere more fundamental. Somewhere that had nothing to do with effort or intention. He looked at the room, then at her. You chose this deliberately, he said. Not a question, south-facing. One entrance. The adjacent rooms are unoccupied until afternoon. She gestured to the chair across from hers. No one will pass the corridor for at least 2 hours, he sat. He did not relax. She had a feeling that was not something he did easily, but something in him settled, just slightly, as if the particular pressure of being observed by 200 people had been lifted and he was noticing the difference without commenting on it. Tell me about Pell, she said. Before he could begin his own version, he looked at her. Then, apparently deciding she had earned directness, he told her Steward Pell had been placed in the Thornmere household 11 years ago. Before Callum had gotten around to building the staff himself, still in the early months of his inheritance, still learning what a dukedom actually required of a person day to day. Pell had come recommended through an intermediary, who had come recommended through the household placement office. A chain of introductions that seemed unremarkable at the time, and had recently begun to look like something else entirely. The man behind it, he now believed, was Viscount Gideon Marr. Ren knew the name. She had encountered it 3 times in the past year, once in a newspaper column about parliamentary influence, once in a dinner conversation she hadn't been meant to hear, once in the background of a letter Lady Dunmore's mother had been composing and hadn't closed before Ren entered the room. The name had a particular quality in every context, the quality of a name people mentioned carefully, as if even speaking it required a kind of attention. He wants leverage, she said. He wants control. Callum's voice was quiet, which is the same thing made permanent, a pause. He has been systematically working to acquire influence over the 6 major estates in this region. Not through land or title, through information, through knowing what is said in private rooms, through knowing what agreements are made before they become public, and you are one of the 6. I am the one he most wants and has least access to. My household is tight. My staff are loyal, he paused. I have been operating under that assumption for 11 years. Ren thought about that. She thought about Pell in that corridor. The half-second pause before moving on. The deliberate pace of a man doing exactly what he'd been placed there to do, for 11 years before anyone started looking. He wasn't placed to steal documents, she said slowly. He was placed to watch, to map your movements, to know your routine well enough that when the moment came, when Marr needed to intercept something specific, Pell would know exactly where you would be. Callum looked at her, and the moment came, she continued. Yesterday, you received something in that corridor. Something Marr wanted intercepted. A long pause. Yes, he said. And Aldous Frey introduced Pell. The name landed differently than the others. She saw it. The fractional change in his expression. The specific quality of a man who has just heard something confirmed that he had been hoping, quietly and without admitting it, was not true. Aldous Frey has been my legal steward for 12 years, he said. My father trusted him, I know. She kept her voice level, not unkind, just accurate. And Pell was introduced through the same office. 1 year earlier, she let that sit for a moment, which means one of 2 things. Either Aldous Frey was already working with Marr before he came to you, or he was placed by the same system and compromised later, when Pell was already established, which means the question isn't whether one of them is passing information, Callum said quietly. The question is whether both of them are, or neither, Ren said. He looked at her. Aldous Frey has been with you 12 years, long enough to have developed genuine loyalty, long enough to have reasons that have nothing to do with Marr. She paused. Before we conclude anything, I would like to observe them both. You would do that? I said I would help. Helping me could be. He stopped. Recalibrated. Marr is not a man who responds well to obstacles. Ren looked at him steadily. Your Grace, she said. I have been managing difficult people since I was 19 years old. I have managed men who believed their title made them immune to consequences. I have managed women who used social cruelty as a form of daily exercise. She paused. I am not frightened of a Viscount with a staffing problem. Something happened in his expression then, not the almost smile she'd seen twice before, not the suggestion of one, a real smile, brief, genuine, transforming the severe lines of his face into something quite suddenly different, something that was not prepared for and would later be attributed to the particular quality of the morning light and definitely nothing else. Tea, he said. I beg your pardon? I mentioned in the card that I also wanted tea. He reached for the pot that had been sitting between them, ignored for the past hour, and poured 2 cups with the same deliberate ease with which he appeared to do everything. Ren watched him pour tea. Dukes, she said, do not generally pour tea. I am aware of what dukes generally do. He set her cup in front of her, settled back in his chair with his own. Completely composed. I find convention useful in public and unnecessary in private. This is private. She looked at the cup, then at him. Then she picked it up. They drank tea in the honey-colored light of the south garden room. Outside, Thornmere Castle proceeded with its magnificent business. The particular organized chaos of the morning after a great wedding, all those important people beginning the slow, graceful process of dispersing back to their own important lives. Inside, 2 people who were both extremely skilled at being alone found that they were, for the moment, something other than that, something neither of them had a word for yet. She did not mention the corridor. He did not mention it. It existed between them anyway, a beginning neither of them had planned, 3 seconds, and a pair of crushed roses and the specific, unignorable fact that something had been started before either of them had a chance to decide whether to start it. The East Portrait Gallery of Thornmere Castle ran for 40 feet along the castle's upper east corridor. 22 portraits, 3 landscape commissions, and 1 small oil painting of a hunting dog that had been there since the previous century and which no one had ever moved because the dog appeared so content that removing it felt unkind. Ren had walked through this gallery at 7:43 on the morning of the wedding. She'd been early. She was always early, and the ceremony wasn't until 10. And Lady Dunmore had still been in the hands of her dressing maid with another 2 hours of hair and pearls and carefully managed family tension ahead of her. So, Ren had walked through the gallery alone, and she had looked at the frames, not the portraits, because frames told you things. The condition of the gilding. Whether the hanging wire had been replaced recently or left to age. Whether the paintings were being maintained or merely displayed. She could tell within 30 seconds of entering a room whether the people living in it cared for their things or simply owned them. She had stopped at the 3rd portrait, a previous duke from his clothing. Mid-last century, formal commission, the kind of portrait designed to communicate rather than illuminate. Competent work. Good subject. Wrong light. The painting had been rehung at a 3-degree angle to compensate for a sconce that had probably been removed or repositioned at some point, and the result was that the afternoon light, when it came, would fall across the canvas in a way that flattened everything the painter had worked to achieve. It bothered her. In the practical, professional way that things in other people's houses bothered her when she couldn't fix them. She had moved on. She had not, at the time, noticed the man standing near the gallery's far end, Callum Vance. She knew this now. He had been standing there, she would learn later, for approximately 4 minutes. Long enough to have looked at most of the portraits, long enough to have stopped in front of the 3rd one with the particular stillness of a man who had noticed something and was just deciding what, if anything, to do about it. He had seen her come in. He had seen her come in. She had not seen him. That was, she thought, a significant piece of information. He watched me before the corridor, before the kiss, before any of it, not because she was interesting to him then. She was a woman in a gallery with a basket, invisible by design, invisible by profession. But because he was the kind of man who noticed what things looked like and whether they were being properly cared for. And she had been doing the same thing. 2 people looking at the same neglected painting. From opposite ends of the same room. Without ever exchanging a word, she thought about this more than she intended to. She thought about it when Lady Dunmore's mother cornered her near the morning room and spent 20 minutes discussing the social implications of the seating arrangement in the East dining room. An arrangement that, notably, no one was supposed to know Ren had altered. She thought about it when she was sorting Lady Dunmore's post, and a card fell out of the pile that wasn't addressed to Lady Dunmore, Miss Ren Calloway. Companion to Lady Dunmore. By hand, his handwriting. She recognized it now. She opened it. I will be returning to my estate in 3 days. Before I do, I would value your assistance with a matter that cannot be resolved through correspondence. I have reason to believe the threat I described is not limited to Pell, and that the source of the breach may be closer to me than I had hoped. There are 3 people who had access to my itinerary for the wedding. One of them passed it to Pell. I have been trying to determine which one for some time. I would like your eyes on all 3 of them. I am aware this is a significant thing to ask of someone I met 2 days ago in a corridor. I am asking anyway. CV. Ren folded the card, set it down, picked it up again. 3 people. One of them is Pell, already established, which leaves 2, and one of those 2 has been with him for 12 years. She thought about the portrait gallery. About 2 people looking at the same thing, without knowing they were looking at the same thing. She thought about a man who poured his own tea. She wrote back, I can be present at whatever social obligations you have before your departure. Lady Dunmore has 3 events in the next 2 days. I will be in attendance at all of them. If your associates are also present, I will watch them. I will not make myself obvious. I am very good at not making myself obvious. Tell me their names. W. C. She gave it to her own footman to deliver, and went back to sorting the post. He sent the names that afternoon. Aldous Frey. Legal steward, 12 years. Late 50s, careful warmth, the professional kind. The kind that kept records rather than connections. Steward Pell. Household steward, 11 years. Mid-40s, efficient, unremarkable, present everywhere and noticed nowhere. Greaves. Personal secretary, 8 years. Lean, precise, mechanical in his efficiency. Reliable in the way clocks were reliable. 3 names. 3 men. One of them had handed Callum Vance's private movements to a Viscount, who collected other people's secrets the way some men collected paintings. Start with what they do when they think no one is watching, Ren wrote back. That is always more informative than what they do when they know they are. She already had her answer forming. Not confirmed, not yet, but forming. Because she had been watching rooms full of complicated people for 10 years. And she already knew what to look for. 3 days, that was what she had. 3 days before Callum Vance returned to his estate. 3 social obligations. 3 chances to watch 3 men in rooms full of important people, doing what important people always did, performing consequences while the actual business of the world happened in the margins. Ren had spent 10 years in the margins. She knew exactly what to look for. The first event was a luncheon, Thornmere's great dining room the afternoon after the wedding. 60 guests still in residence, the slow exhale of a great social occasion beginning to wind down. The kind of gathering where everyone was slightly tired and slightly relieved, and slightly less careful than they'd been the day before. Which made it, for Ren's purposes, ideal. She sat at the companion's table near the east window. Invisible, efficient, present for Lady Dunmore's needs and no one else's, and she watched. Greaves' first, lean man, 41, 42. The precise, watermarked quality of someone who had spent decades being essential without ever being remarkable. He moved quickly between tasks. He spoke to everyone and remembered nothing that wasn't immediately relevant. He was efficient in the way clocks were efficient, predictable, mechanical, no waste, no excess. Nothing hidden there, Ren thought. He is exactly what he appears to be, which in her experience usually meant he probably was, then Aldous Frey older. 57. Silver at the temples, warm eyes. The practiced ease of a man who had learned to make people comfortable as a professional skill rather than a personal quality. He laughed at precisely the right moments. He remembered names, spouses, children, the recent illness of Lord Fenmore's mother, the new horse Sir Briggs had purchased in September. Too thorough, Ren noted. That kind of memory doesn't come from genuine interest. It comes from record-keeping. But record-keeping wasn't guilt. Record-keeping was just record-keeping. She filed it. And then there was Pell. Steward Pell moved through the luncheon like furniture moved through a room, present. Necessary. Utterly overlooked. He refilled glasses that didn't need refilling. He adjusted table settings that were already correct. He was, in the technical sense, doing his job, except. He did it near Callum, not conspicuously, not obviously. But every time Callum moved to a different conversation, a different cluster of guests, a different corner of the long dining room, Within 4 minutes, Pell had found a reason to be within earshot. Mapping, Ren thought. Still mapping. Even now, she picked up her own glass, took a small sip, said nothing to anyone. The second event was a garden walk the following morning. Thornmere's grounds were extraordinary in the way that November grounds could be extraordinary. Formal gardens terracing down toward a river that caught the late autumn light in a way that suggested the landscape had been arranged for exactly this effect. 40 guests, loose groupings, the pleasant unstructured drift of people who had been formally obligated to each other for 2 days, and were now simply enjoying the fact that the weather held. Ren stayed with Lady Dunmore's group, and watched from the comfortable, invisible position of a woman whose job required her to be present without participating. Aldous Frey walked with Callum for 20 minutes. Their conversation looked easy, familiar. The specific ease of two people who had spent years in the same professional orbit and had developed something that looked like trust from the outside and might well be trust from the inside. Aldous laughed twice. Callum almost smiled once. 12 years, Ren thought. That's real. Whatever else is true, that part is real. She watched Aldous' hands. He gestured when he spoke. Open, expressive gestures. The hands of a man who wasn't hiding what he was saying, but when Callum turned away, just briefly, to respond to someone approaching from the left, Aldous' hands stopped, and in the stillness for just a moment, he looked at something across the garden. Not someone. Something. A specific point near the garden's east wall, and then Callum turned back, and Aldous was laughing again. There, Ren thought that. She didn't know yet what it meant, but she knew what it looked like. It looked like a man carrying something he hadn't put down in a very long time, and occasionally, just occasionally, checking to see if the exit was still where he remembered. She filed it, said nothing, kept walking. The third event was the parliamentary reception. This was different from the luncheon and the garden walk. This was a formal reception held at a private house 2 miles from Thornmere, attended by men whose names appeared in newspapers regularly, and whose conversations had in the past moved money and policy and the quiet architecture of consequence and directions that affected people who never knew their names. Ren attended as Lady Dunmore's companion, which meant she was present, essential, and to everyone in the room entirely invisible, except she wasn't watching the room. Watching one man, Aldous Frey. She'd been watching him for 2 days now. She knew the way he stood, the rhythm of his movement, the specific quality of his attention in different kinds of social spaces. She had filed it all carefully, the way she filed everything. Not written down, never written down, but organized in the precise internal catalog of a woman who had learned early that memory was more reliable than paper. So she noticed when it changed. It was small. The kind of small that most people would dismiss as nothing. Aldous was standing near the window, speaking with a man Ren didn't recognize, 50s, unremarkable, the deliberately ordinary appearance of someone who had spent considerable time practicing being unmemorable. Their conversation was brief, polite, the surface texture of two acquaintances who happened to find themselves near the same window at the same time. And then Aldous adjusted his ring, left hand, the signet ring he wore on his 4th finger. He moved it, deliberately, slowly, to his middle finger, then back, then away. 3 seconds. Total. Ren set down her glass. There it is. She knew what that was. She had read about it once, in a book about diplomatic intelligence, 3 years ago, borrowed from Lady Dunmore's library out of idle curiosity on a rainy afternoon. A signal. Old, simple, reliable, precisely because it required no paper, no whisper, no exchange of anything that could be traced back to a conversation that never officially happened. It meant received, which meant something had been passed, not tonight. Tonight was acknowledgement. The thing itself had happened earlier, or would happen later. Something Aldous had carried to this room in his memory, in the ordinary conversation of a man doing his job, and delivered in the most unremarkable way possible. Ren watched him replace the ring. Watched him smile at something the unmemorable man said. Watched him glance, very briefly, toward where Callum was standing across the room. And she saw, just for a moment, what Callum would never have seen from where he was standing. The expression on Aldous Frey's face. Not satisfaction, not calculation, not the quiet pride of a man who has successfully completed something difficult. Relief, the specific, exhausted relief of a man who has just done something he hated doing. again. For perhaps the 100th time. The relief of finishing a task you despise, knowing you'll be handed the same task again next time. Oh, Ren thought. Oh, that's not what I expected at all. She sent Callum a card that night. I have what you need, not by letter, in person. Tomorrow morning, if possible, Dulcie's. His response arrived within 40 minutes. Garden room. 9 o'clock. I will be there, CV. She sat with her lamp and her thoughts for a long time after that. Because she had found the answer. The answer Callum needed. The answer that would let him move forward, protect his household, remove the compromise. But the answer was not the simple thing she had expected to find. And she wasn't sure, yet, how he was going to receive the difference. She was in the garden room at 8:55. She needed the 5 minutes. He's going to want certainty, she thought. He's going to want a clear verdict. Guilty or not guilty, loyal or not loyal, the precise, actionable truth. And the truth is more complicated than that. Which is always the way, isn't it? The truth is always more complicated than anyone wants it to be. The citrus trees, the white furniture, morning light doing its same honest work through the south-facing glass. She had come to think of this room as a place outside the ordinary social machinery of the castle. A room that belonged to whatever was happening between her and Callum, which did not have a category yet and which she was not, she told herself firmly, going to assign one prematurely. She had her notes. Not written. She never wrote notes in situations like this, because written notes had a way of existing in places you hadn't intended. Everything was in her head, organized, precise. Ready Callum arrived at 9 exactly. He looked at her face when he walked in, not the room, not the chair, her face. The way he always did, she was beginning to notice. He calibrated to her first, as if whatever she was thinking was more useful information than whatever the furniture could tell him. It's Aldous Frey, she said before he sat down, before any of the social rituals that preceded difficult conversations, because he didn't need them and she didn't have patience for them today. He sat, slowly. Tell me, she told him everything. The ring at the parliamentary's reception, the signal, the unmemorable man by the window, the chain of inference she'd built and across 3 events and 2 days of watching a man carry something invisible and heavy through every room he entered. Callum listened without interrupting. She had come to recognize this about him. He actually listened. Not in the performative way, not the careful nodding, the strategic science class that men used to appear attentive while privately organizing their response. He listened with his full attention present. Eyes on her face, not moving. When she finished, he was quiet, a long quiet. She watched the processing of it, the small tightening around his eyes, the controlled exhale, the deliberate steadying of a man who had learned to receive difficult information without letting it show on his face, because showing it on his face in any room had always cost him something. Quiet. Just that. Yes. My father trusted him, I know. Another silence. Longer this time. And then Ren said the thing she'd been deciding whether to say since last night. I don't think he chose this. Callum looked at her. The relief on his face when he signaled, that wasn't the relief of a man completing a job he wanted. It was the relief of a man enduring one he didn't. She kept her voice level. Not soft, just accurate. Something is being held over him. Something significant enough that he has been doing this for years against his own inclination. Against his own loyalty, possibly. You're certain. I am certain of what I saw. The interpretation is mine, she met his eyes. But I have been reading rooms for 10 years, and what I saw on Aldous Frey's face last night was not complicity. It was captivity. The word sat between them. Callum was very still. Gideon Marr, he said. Not a question. Almost certainly. Marr has been building leverage over people for years. It's his method. It's what he does. Aldous Frey has been with you long enough to know everything about your legal affairs, your agreements, your dealings before they become public. He is exactly the kind of asset Marr would want. A pause. And if Marr found something in Aldous's past, something old enough and serious enough that Aldous believed there was no way out, he would have had no way out, Callum said, quietly. Marr does not offer exits. He offers choices between 2 kinds of ruin and then presents the less ruinous option as though he is doing you a favor. Ren nodded. That's what I believe happened. 9 years ago, give or take. 3 years after Aldous came to you. She paused. Which means Pell was already in place when Marr turned Aldous. Pell was the foundation. Aldous was the addition. 2 different compromises serving the same purpose. Something moved through Callum's expression. Something that was not anger, or not only anger, something older than anger, colder. The specific weight of a man realizing that the threat he'd believed he was tracking had been inside his walls for longer than he'd understood. Had been there before he started looking. Had been there, possibly, before he'd inherited the dukedom at all. He planned this before I was a duke, Callum said. He planned for the possibility. Men like Mare don't invest in people. They invest in positions. He didn't place Pell because he knew you. He placed Pell because your father's household was one of 6 major positions in the region, and he was building a network. Methodically, patiently. The way you build things when you intend them to last. The long game, the very long game. Callum looked at her steadily. You got all of this from a ring and an expression, and 2 days of watching a man trying not to look like he was counting the exits. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what do I do with it? Which was, Ren thought, the right question. Not who do I punish, the right question. What does this require? What is the correct response to a man who betrayed me for 9 years because he had no other choice? You don't confront Aldous publicly, she said. Not yet. If Mara has any kind of automatic exposure arrangement on whatever he's holding, if the information becomes public when contact with Aldous is suddenly disrupted, then moving too quickly gives Mara exactly what he wants. He burns your legal steward. You lose 12 years of institutional knowledge, and Mar walks away untouched. Then what? You find out what Mare is holding first. A pause. And then you give Aldous a way out that Mare cannot block. Callum held her gaze for a long moment. You've thought about this considerably more than one night's worth, he said. I started thinking about it during the luncheon, Ren said. When I saw his hands, they stopped moving. Just for a moment, while you were turned away. Men who are lying keep their hands busy. Men who are afraid go very still, a beat of silence. You are, Callum said slowly, genuinely extraordinary. Ren looked at him steadily. I am observant. There is a difference, is there? Extraordinary implies exception. I am simply paying attention to the things other people decide are beneath their notice. She paused. That is not a talent. It is a choice. He held her gaze. And there was something in his expression that she was still learning to read. Not the almost smile, not the controlled assessment. Something quieter than both. Something that lived in the space between what he said and what he meant. A space she was becoming increasingly aware was there, and that he was increasingly allowing her to see into. Then I am grateful, he said, for the choice. She did not expect what happened next. Not that morning. The following evening, returning alone from the parliamentary reception. She had left 20 minutes after Lady Dunmore's carriage, because Lady Dunmore had wanted a private word with the hostess, and Ren had stepped out to give them space. She took the path through Thornmere's East Garden, the shorter route. The practical one. She had taken it a dozen times in 3 days. She was 40 feet along it when she became aware of the footsteps behind her. Not loud, not close enough to be accidental, but there, matching her pace with the deliberate half-cadence of someone who was not trying to catch up and was not falling behind, following. Don't change your pace, her brain said, with remarkable calm for a brain that was also, simultaneously, doing several much less calm things. Don't look back yet. Gather information first. You know how to gather information. She gathered one person. Not heavy, the footfall was measured, controlled. Someone who knew how to move quietly and was not bothering to do so completely, which meant they wanted her to know she was being followed, which was a message. Not an attack. A message from whom, she thought. Saying what, exactly? She reached the garden's midpoint, a wide stone terrace, open on 3 sides, nowhere to corner someone without being visible from the castle windows, and she stopped. Turned, the path behind her was empty, almost a shape, just at the edge of the light from the terrace lanterns. Still, watching. Close enough that she could see it was a man, far enough that she couldn't see his face. The specific stillness of someone who wanted to be seen seeing her, 3 seconds. She looked directly at the shape looked back. And then it was gone, back into the garden dark, footsteps retreating at the same measured pace, unhurried, as if it had accomplished exactly what it intended to accomplish, which it had. Mar knows about you, the footsteps had said. Act accordingly. Ren stood on the terrace for a full minute. Her heart was doing something emphatic and unhelpful. Then she straightened her jacket, lifted her chin, walked the rest of the path at her normal pace. She did not run. She was not going to run. But she was also not, she decided, going to wait until morning. She had never arrived at Thornmere's main entrance unannounced. It was, she was aware, not a small thing to do. Companions did not arrive at ducal estates without appointments. There were protocols. There were appropriate channels. There was an entire social architecture designed specifically to prevent precisely this kind of impromptu arrival, and Ren had spent 10 years learning its every principle and enforcing them on behalf of whoever employed her. She was at the front entrance in 11 minutes. The butler, a composed man of 60 with the professionally serene expression of someone accustomed to managing the unexpected with grace, opened the door and took in the sight of her with only the faintest elevation of one eyebrow. "Miss Calloway, it's urgent," she said. "Please tell His Grace that Ren Calloway is here and that it concerns the matter he has been managing. He will want to know immediately." The butler absorbed this, disappeared. She stood in the entrance hall. 43 seconds, she counted, and then Callum appeared at the top of the staircase, still in his evening clothes. A sheaf of documents in one hand, clearly mid-work, not mid-rest. His cravat was slightly off-center, which was, she had come to understand, the Callum Vance equivalent of complete dishevelment. He was never anything other than composed. But occasionally, when the work was deep enough, the precision slipped by 1 or 2 degrees. He looked down at her in the entrance hall, and something moved through his expression in rapid succession. Sharpness first, the immediate professional assessment, then concern, then something else. Brief, something that looked, she processed this later, not in the moment, like relief. The uncomplicated relief of a man who had not known he was waiting for something until it arrived. "Come up," he said. She climbed the stairs. He held the study door open for her, which she noted and did not comment on. The study was a working room, papers on the desk that were clearly being read, not arranged for display. A fire that had been burning long enough to settle into serious, reliable warmth. Books on the shelves that had been opened. Maps on the side table that had been marked in 2 colors of ink. This was where he actually lived, she understood. Not the formal reception rooms, not the spaces designed for the performance of consequence. Here, in the working room with the marked maps and the fire that nobody had bothered to maintain into decorative perfection. "Tell me," he said, closing the door. She told him, the garden path, the footsteps, the shape at the edge of the lantern light, the deliberate retreat that was less disappearance than demonstration. He listened without moving. When she finished, he set his documents on the desk with a very quiet, very deliberate care that communicated more than if he had thrown them across the room. "He's confirmed you're connected to me," Callum said. "He suspects it. He doesn't know the extent." She kept her voice level. "He's still deciding what to do with that information, which gives us a window. How small? 48 hours. Perhaps less." She met his eyes. "He'll move carefully, he always does. But he'll move." Callum crossed to the window, stood with his back to the room for a moment, looking out at the dark grounds of his estate, the grounds that Pell had been mapping for 11 years. The grounds that Mar had been studying before Callum was old enough to fully understand what the word studying could mean in a context like this. "I am accelerating the timeline with Pell," he said. "We can no longer do this slowly. I need Pell isolated from household operations today. The documentation secured, and Aldous," he stopped. "Aldous needs a different conversation, I agree." He turned then, looked at her. "You are not going back to the Dunmore apartments tonight." She blinked. "I beg your pardon. If Mar has marked you as connected to me, your current lodgings are the first place he'll look for leverage. The Dunmore household has a connection to the same staffing office that placed Pell. You have been in danger of that connection for 3 days without knowing it." He held her gaze. "Steady, completely certain. I have a guest suite in the East Wing. My housekeeper will arrange it. You cannot simply—" "I am aware," he said, before she could finish, "that this is irregular. I am also aware that I am the reason you are in danger, and I am not willing to manage this risk by leaving you 12 streets away, in a house that Mare has access to through the Dunmore steward, who was recommended by the same placement office as Pell." She stared at him. "You investigated the Dunmore steward. When you told me about the placement office, I checked who else had been placed through the same system." A pause. "I should have told you that 2 days ago. I apologize. I was attempting to limit the scope of what I was drawing you into, which was, Ren thought, One of the more honest things anyone had ever said to her. The apology was genuine, not a social formula. An actual acknowledgement of a specific error made for reasons that were not entirely without care. "I will need to inform Lady Dunmore," she said. "I will write to Lord Dunmore this evening. They'll be told there's a security concern requiring temporary relocation." "No details beyond that," he held her gaze. "What will you tell them yourself?" "The truth that's appropriate. That there's a risk in my current lodgings and I've made alternative arrangements. And what will you tell everyone else?" Her voice stayed level. "A duke housing an unmarried companion will be noticed, Callum. That is not a small social consequence." She used his name. Not deliberately, exactly, but not accidentally either, he noticed. She saw him notice. "Let me manage what London makes of this," he said quietly. "I have some experience navigating what the city chooses to say about me." A pause. "I am not dismissing the social reality. I am choosing to absorb the cost of it." Those are different things. They were. She knew they were. She looked at him. This man who had kissed her in a corridor before he knew her name, who poured his own tea, who checked the staffing records of her employer on her behalf, who was standing in his study at nearly 10 in the evening, with his cravat off-center and his full, undivided attention on her face. "All right," she said, something in him released. Just slightly. The specific quality of a man who has been holding something carefully and has just been given permission to set it down. "I will need the rest of my things from the Dunmore apartments," she said. "I've already arranged for their retrieval." She looked at him. "You arranged it before I agreed to stay." "I arranged it before I asked," he said. In case the answer was yes. A pause. "I was prepared for it not to be," which was, Ren thought, the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her in the context of asking for something. She turned back to the fire. The library was very quiet around them. Not uncomfortable quiet, the other kind. The kind that existed between two people who had run out of necessary things to say and were deciding, together and without discussing it, whether to say the unnecessary ones instead. She didn't say them. Not yet, but she was aware, with the same clear, practical precision that noticed rings on wrong fingers and footsteps that paused, and light falling badly on old paintings, that the distance between yet and now was getting smaller. And she was, for the first time in a very long time, not entirely sure she wanted to manage it. The night was quiet. Thornmere's East Wing guest suite was smaller than she'd expected. Warmer. The fire had been laid before she arrived. The books on the shelf beside the bed were a random collection. Someone's actual reading, not decorative arrangement. She stood at the window for a long time. The grounds below were dark. Still no footsteps. Mar knows where I am now, she thought. He will recalculate. Good. Another part of her thought. Let him recalculate from a position where I am inside these walls, instead of walking through a garden alone at night. She thought about Aldous Frey, the relief on his face at the parliamentary reception. 9 years of that relief. Once per exchange. Once per moment of handing over something that belonged to a man who trusted him completely. He protected his daughter, she thought, and he hated himself for every year of it. She pulled the curtain, sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, somewhere on the estate, a nightbird called once and was silent. She was in the household of a man she had met 5 days ago in a corridor with crushed roses and a 30-second margin and absolutely no plan. She was, she realized, with something between surprise and acceptance, the way you accepted weather, exactly where she wanted to be. That was new, that was entirely, completely new. She lay down, did not sleep for a long time. But it was the good kind of not sleeping. The kind where the thing keeping you awake was not dread or worry, or the cataloging of problems that had no solution yet. Just awareness. Of the fire in the grate, the quiet of the East Wing. The particular quality of a house that had been properly cared for by someone who understood that houses, like people, needed tending rather than merely maintenance. She was aware of all of it, and she did not want any of it to go away. The conversation with Aldous Frey happened the following afternoon. Ren was not in the room. Callum had been firm on that. She had, after a brief consideration, agreed. There was no useful role for her in the specific, private moment when a man discovered he had been found out. What happened in that room was between Callum and a man who had served his family for 12 years. Her presence would have been an intrusion, a witness to something already painful enough without an audience. She waited in the library, which, She was less good at the particular quality of this specific waiting. He's been carrying this for 9 years, she kept thinking. 9 years of handing pieces of Callum's life to a man who had no right to them. 9 years of that exhausted relief at receptions and luncheons and garden walks. The relief of finishing something you hate doing, again and again and again. The fire crackled. Outside, a carriage moved on the drive. She turned a page she hadn't actually read. Callum came in at 5:30. She heard him before she saw him. His step. She had come to know his step, which said something about how much time they'd spent in adjacent rooms lately, without discussing whether that arrangement was intentional or simply what had happened. This step was different from his usual. Not slower exactly, heavier. The step of a man carrying a different weight than he'd started the day with. He sat not across from her. Beside her. The chair beside the fire, not the chair across from it. She waited. He didn't deny it, Callum said. His voice was quiet, even. The specific evenness of a man managing something he hadn't finished processing. He was relieved, she said. He looked at her. You knew. I thought he might be. She paused. The relief of someone who has been caught is different from the relief of someone who has been carrying something too heavy and has finally been given permission to put it down. He'd been waiting to be found out. He just didn't know how to arrange it himself. Callum exhaled. 9 years, he said. He was approached 3 years after he came to me. Mara's people found a financial decision from Aldous' past. A transaction from his previous position that wasn't illegal, but looked badly enough that it would have ended his career. Possibly his family's standing. He was quiet for a moment. He has a daughter. She was 12 when Mar found the decision. She's 21 now. Ren absorbed that. 9 years of protecting a 21-year-old who never knew she needed protecting. What happens now? She asked. He's agreed to testify. Fully. The names of every intermediary. Every piece of information passed. The specific chain between himself and Mar's operations. Callum looked at the fire. In exchange, I provide documentation that the financial decision was within acceptable parameters of the era, which it was, actually. Mara's people framed it in the worst possible light, which is what they always do with the things they find. A pause. And Aldous retires. With pension, quietly. Before the formal proceedings begin. That's generous. That's correct, Callum said, simply. Not generous, correct. The word of a man who had decided what the right response was and was not interested in being praised for it. Ren looked at him for a moment. 12 years of service. A daughter who never knew. A man who did something wrong every year because he'd done something questionable once, long before anyone knew his name. What about Pell? She asked. Pell was interviewed this morning. He's less complicated, a beat. He was placed specifically. He's been a professional operative since before he came to Thornmere. No family complications, no conflicted loyalty. A pause. He's been removed from household operations. The formal process will follow. And the documentation Mara was trying to intercept? In the corridor? Callum was quiet for a moment, secured, he said. The night before the ceremony. Pell was 30 seconds too late. He looked at her. Because of a companion with a basket of pressed roses who chose the wrong corridor, Ren didn't say anything, because there was nothing useful to say to that. 30 seconds. The whole shape of the last 5 days, the corridor, the kiss, the card, the garden room, all of it, resting on a 30-second margin in a servant's passage. You are thinking something, Callum said. I am thinking. Ren said carefully, that 30 seconds is a very small margin for something this significant. It is. He held her gaze. Some margins are exactly the right size. Any larger and you might not notice them. Any smaller and they don't hold. She almost smiled. Caught it mostly. The testimony will give you the chain, she said. Redirecting. Because redirecting was safer than the alternative, which was sitting here in the firelight noticing things she hadn't finished deciding how to feel about. But it won't stop Mar directly, no. That requires the parliamentary process. He leaned back slightly. The controlled posture easing just fractionally. The same settling she'd seen in the garden room, the pressure of 200 people's scrutiny replaced by the different pressure of one person's full attention, which was either simpler or considerably more complicated. The documentation Aldous is providing, combined with what we already have on Pell, establishes a pattern of deliberate placement across multiple households. That's not a private matter. That's a matter for formal proceedings. How long? A fortnight, if the relevant committee moves quickly. He looked at her. Which they will, she believed him. Completely and without reservation, which was itself notable. Because Ren Calloway believed most things provisionally, with the specific skepticism of someone who had learned that institutions moved on their own timelines regardless of anyone's urgency. But looking at Callum Vance in the firelight of his own library, she believed him. Mara will not simply wait, she said. No, he'll look for another angle. Yes, which means he will try to remove me as a variable, yes. His voice was very quiet. Which is why you're here, and why you're staying here until this is finished. Ren looked at the fire, staying here. She thought about the portrait gallery, the third painting, the wrong angle of the afternoon light. Two people who had walked into the same room for different reasons and ended up looking at the same neglected thing without knowing the other was there. Some things, she thought, don't require planning. Some things just require 30 seconds and the wrong corridor. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, not to Ren. Not to Callum, to Lord Dunmore, which was, she would later understand, exactly the point. Mar did not make mistakes of targeting. He understood leverage the way architects understood load-bearing walls. Not which ones looked important, but which ones, if removed, brought everything else down quietly and completely, without any single point of failure that could be identified and reinforced. Ren was the load-bearing wall. She just hadn't known anyone else had noticed. Callum told her that evening. No softening, no careful preamble. He came to the library where she'd been reading and sat down and told her directly. The way she had come to understand, he told her everything, as if she had earned the truth without decoration, and he intended to keep paying it. Lord Dunmore had received a communication, through an intermediary, the way Mar always operated, never directly, never traceable to a single source, just a letter delivered through a chain of 3 unremarkable hands, suggesting that Lady Dunmore's companion had been engaged in inappropriate private dealings with the Duke, conduct unbecoming a household employee. A scandal if Lord Dunmore chose not to act, dismiss her by Friday, or the information would find its way to the relevant social columns by Monday morning. Ren set down her book. She set it down carefully. Spine aligned with the table edge, bookmark in place. Because she needed something to do with her hands that wasn't the other thing her hands wanted to do, which was grip something until the frustration had somewhere to go. He's not going after you, she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than it had any right to be. He's going after my income, my position, everything I built from nothing over 10 years. Yes, because he can't touch you directly. The parliamentary process is already moving, so he looked for the nearest pressure point. Yes, and he decided I was it. Callum was watching her, not with the assessing, tactical look, the working look she'd seen across days of garden rooms and study fires. Something different. Something quieter and considerably more concentrated. What does Lord Dunmore intend to do? She asked. That, Callum said, depends on what we tell him. Ren looked at him. Thought about Lady Dunmore. Genuinely kind beneath her social training. The specific, uncomplicated warmth of a woman who noticed when other people were uncomfortable and quietly tried to fix it. She would be distressed by this. She would be distressed on Ren's behalf, which was its own kind of difficulty. Being protected by someone you were supposed to be protecting? Tell him the truth, she said. Callum waited, that I helped you. That this letter is a coercion attempt, not a genuine scandal. That Mare is using the threat of social embarrassment to remove a resource he finds inconvenient, a pause. And that Lord Dunmore is welcome to decide what kind of man he is. The kind who responds to coercion, or the kind who doesn't. Callum held her gaze for a moment. And the rest of it? He asked. Quiet, careful. She understood what he was asking. What we are, she said, is not Mar's business, and not Lord Dunmore's business, precisely. But if the question is whether there is something here to be ashamed of, she met his eyes directly. The answer is no. He stood, looked at her for one more second, then went to speak to Lord Dunmore. She waited. She was very good at waiting. She had spent 10 years waiting in rooms while other people's lives resolved themselves in the next room over. She had a practice for it, the quiet, methodical management of her own attention, moving it from thought to thought, the way you moved furniture in a room that was too full, finding the arrangement that took up the least space and caused the least disruption. That practice was not working. He's telling a man he barely knows that his wife's companion is worth defending, she thought. He's absorbing a social consequence he did not create and did not deserve because... Because what, exactly? Don't, she told herself. Don't answer that yet. You have plenty of information, the other part of herself answered back, with the specific patience of someone who has been waiting for the rest of herself to catch up. The part of you that counts footsteps and reads expressions across crowded rooms. That part has been accumulating information about this question since a corridor and 3 crushed roses. And it has an answer. Not yet, she said, almost. The other part said, 31 minutes. Then the door opened, Callum came in. He refused, Callum said. She exhaled. Without hesitation, Callum added. Lord Dunmore said, and I am conveying this accurately, that his wife would be, quote, delighted. Whether that is an accurate assessment of Lady Dunmore's character or an underestimate of how much social complications actually concern her. It's accurate, Ren said. She cares considerably more about people than propriety. Then you are safe on that particular front, on the others? He moved into the room, sat beside her, not across beside the chair he always chose now, which had stopped being remarkable and started being simply the arrangement of things between them, and said what came next. The parliamentary process will complete within the fortnight. Aldous' testimony will be presented in closed session first, then formally entered into the record. Mara's access to the 6 estates will be revoked. His network of placements will be mapped and removed systematically. He paused. He will retreat and redirect. Men like him always do. But not toward this. Not toward me. Because there will be nothing to leverage. His voice was very quiet. And because I will have made it clear, in every room that matters, that you are not available as a point of pressure. Ren looked at the fire. In every room that matters. That was not a small thing. That was a declaration with social weight and social consequences, and the specific permanence of a statement made publicly by a man whose public statements were taken seriously by everyone who heard them. That communicates something specific, she said. Yes, about what I am to you? Yes. The fire settled in the grate. Outside, a carriage moved on the distant road, the ordinary sound of the world continuing its business in the way it always did, indifferent to what was happening inside this particular room. Callum? Yes. The first morning, she said. The portrait gallery. Before the corridor, before any of it, she paused. You saw me come in. He was quiet for a moment. Yes. But I didn't see you. No. Why didn't you say something? He thought about that. Not quickly. The way he thought about things that mattered. With the full weight of his attention applied to finding the honest answer rather than the convenient one. Because, he said slowly, you were doing something that didn't require an audience. You were looking at the frames, the condition of things. Whether they were being properly maintained. A pause. I have walked through that gallery 100 times. I know what's in it. I know what's wrong with the third portrait, the light angle, the rehung wire. He looked at her. No one has ever come in and looked at what I was looking at. Ren absorbed that. I noticed you stop in front of it, she said. I know. You told me what I didn't tell you, she said. Is that I stood there for a full minute after you looked away. Because you saw something that bothered you and you couldn't fix it without causing a comment, so you just stood with it and moved on. A pause. I found that the most honest thing I'd seen anyone do in 2 days of watching people perform consequence at each other. He looked at her, those eyes. Steady. Open, in the way they were only here. Only in this room. Only with her, you saw that, he said. I told you. I'm very good at not being seen, which means, he said, very quietly, that everything you've seen in the past week, everything you've noticed, everything you've observed, you chose to see. You could have looked away. You could have kept looking at frames. Yes, but you didn't. No. And there it was, not the kiss in the corridor. That had been need and calculation, and a fraction of a second's decision made before thought could interfere. Not the tea in the garden room. That had been trust, tentative and new, finding its first foothold in careful ground. Not even the study, or the library, or the 31 minutes of waiting. This, 2 people confirming, quietly and without drama, that the looking had been mutual from the beginning, and had always been a choice. 3 days passed. Ren moved through them, with the professional composure that had served her for 10 years. She attended to Lady Dunmore's remaining correspondence. She managed the last administrative details of the wedding's aftermath, the acknowledgement letters, the gift registry, the small mountain of social obligation that accompanied any event of this scale and which would not manage itself. She did her job, which was what she had always done. Except, she was also doing something else. Every evening in the library, she told Callum what she had observed during the day. Not the household business. He had no interest in Lady Dunmore's correspondence, appropriately, but the other things, the social observations. The patterns she'd noticed in the cluster of guests still in residence, small things. The kind of things that wouldn't have mattered under ordinary circumstances. Under these circumstances, one of them mattered considerably. Sir Aldrich Holt, she said, on the second evening. He's been in conversation with the same man 3 times in 2 days. Each time brief. Each time ending when either of them notices they're being observed. Callum looked up from his documents. Holt is on the parliamentary committee reviewing Mara's case. I know, you recognized him. I paid attention to the invitation cards when we arrived. She paused. The man he's speaking with is not a guest. He arrived 2 days after the wedding. Secondary staff, apparently. But his manner in those conversations is not the manner of secondary staff. Callum was already writing something down. Description, she gave it. Height, approximate age, the specific quality of movement. The deliberate economy of someone trained to be efficient rather than the easy economy of someone simply comfortable in their body. That's enough, Callum said. He looked at her steadily. Mar is trying to influence the committee before Aldous' testimony can be formally presented. Yes. If he can create doubt in even 2 committee members, the process slows. If it slows past the window in which Aldous' protection agreement holds, Aldous becomes vulnerable again. Callum stood. I need to make 3 calls this evening. I know. He was already moving. Then he stopped, turned back, looked at her with an expression that was not the working look and not the quiet library look, and was, in fact, something that seemed to be in the process of becoming its own category. Specific to him. Specific to moments like this one. Specific to the particular reality of 2 people who had been working alongside each other for 10 days and had run out of pretending that was all they were doing. Ren, go make your calls, she said. We can. She stopped. We. When had she started saying we? She knew exactly when. Go, she said again. He almost smiled. Went. She sat with the empty room for a moment. The fire. The marked maps. The books that had been opened. We, she thought. And did not, this time, try to redirect it. Gideon Marr came on a Thursday. Not through a letter this time. Not through an intermediary or a chain of unremarkable hands. He came himself to Thornmere and asked for a private audience with Ren Calloway, which was, she understood immediately, either confidence or desperation, possibly both. The parliamentary process had moved faster than he'd anticipated. Callum had ensured that, quietly and effectively, in the way he ensured most things he had decided should happen. Aldous' testimony was already in committee hands. The documentation was being reviewed. The committee member Mare had been attempting to compromise, had been, apparently, more resistant than expected. Mare was running out of time, so he came himself. She received him in the east sitting room. Not the library. That was Callum's space, and this conversation didn't belong there. Not the garden room, too full of what had happened there. Too associated with the particular light she had come to think of as belonging to something that Mar had no right to touch. The east sitting room. Neutral, practical. The room of a woman who was receiving someone she neither feared nor welcomed. He was exactly what she'd expected from 2 observations across crowded rooms. 60, perhaps 62. Silver-haired in the way of men whose silver hair communicates authority rather than age. Comfortable in the deep, practiced way of someone who had spent decades perfecting the performance of comfort. The easy posture, the warm eyes, the voice pitched to the precise register of reasonable conversation between reasonable people. He wore his consequence lightly. By design. He is very good, she thought. He is genuinely, professionally very good at this, Miss Calloway. He sat across from her without being invited to. An act of practiced ease, designed to establish that this was a conversation between equals, that neither of them needed to stand on ceremony. Thank you for seeing me. I was curious, she said. About what? About what you'd say. He smiled. The smile of a man who appreciated directness, the way a chess player appreciated an opponent who moved confidently. With the specific pleasure of someone who expected the game to be genuinely interesting. I'll be direct then, he said. Please. You are a remarkably capable woman who has become involved in a complicated situation through no particular fault of your own." He paused. "The Duke of Aldenmere is a man with significant enemies and significant ambitions, and he has drawn you into the machinery of his affairs without, I suspect, fully explaining the weight of what he was asking you to carry." Ren said nothing. "I have no quarrel with you personally," Mara continued. "My interest is in certain information that belongs, by rights, in more balanced hands than it currently occupies. What Callum Vance controls, the knowledge he holds, the agreements he has accumulated. These things affect more than one man's estate." He leaned forward slightly. "I am asking you, simply, to step back. Remove yourself from this. Return to whatever position makes sense for you. The one with Lord Dunmore if it still suits, or another I can arrange. A better one, frankly. And leave this particular matter to the people who have been managing it for considerably longer than you have." The fire crackled. Ren looked at him. She took her time. "How long have you been building this?" she asked. He blinked. "Just fractionally. The network," she clarified. "Pell was placed 11 years ago. That suggests the planning started earlier, before the current Duke inherited. You were preparing for a contingency, a household you wanted access to, regardless of who was running it." She paused. "That's not opportunism. That's architecture. How long?" He looked at her for a long moment, the warm eyes recalibrating. "There it is," she thought. "There's the actual man under the performance." "You are perceptive," he said. "I've been told, and you've made your choice already," he said. Not accusatory, almost admiringly. "You came into this room having already decided. I came into this room curious about what you'd say." She held his gaze steadily. "Now I've heard it, and?" "You spent a very long time," she said, "controlling what other people know. Building a system where knowledge was currency and you held the bank and set the exchange rate." A pause. "But you cannot control what has already been seen. Aldous Frey has had 9 years to observe your operations from the inside. Pell has had 11. The information they've provided isn't a vulnerability that disappears when I leave a room." She held his gaze. "You came here to close a door that isn't there anymore." The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. It was the silence of a man remapping a situation and finding that the map no longer matched the territory he was standing in. Mar stood, still composed, still controlled. Because men like him did not allow anything external to show on their faces, regardless of what was happening internally. That composure was their armor and their instrument, and they wore it in every room. "You are," he said, "going to have a complicated life?" "I've had a complicated life," Ren said. "I've managed." He looked at her for one more second, then he left. She listened to his footsteps cross the hall, the front door. The quiet sound of the world outside absorbing his departure the way it absorbed everything. Without comment, without ceremony, she sat with the empty room for a full minute. Her heart was doing something loud and emphatic. He's gone, she thought. That specific version of this is over. And then the other thing she was thinking underneath that, which was, I just told the most dangerous man in 3 counties that his plan has already failed. To his face. Without my voice shaking. She looked at her hands, steady. When did that happen, she thought. When did I become someone whose hands are steady in rooms like that? She knew the answer, 30 seconds in a corridor. A basket of pressed roses, the specific, practical, completely unexpected reality of being seen by someone who was looking at the same thing you were looking at, and not looking away. The parliamentary motion regarding Viscount Gideon Marr was formally tabled 11 days later. Ren was not in the chamber. She didn't need to be. She was in Thornmere's library, in the chair beside the fire, reading a book she was actually reading this time. Actually following the sentences, actually turning pages because she had reached their end, rather than because her hands needed something to do. The waiting had a different quality now. Not the tight, uncertain waiting of the East sitting room when Callum was with Lord Dunmore. The steady waiting of someone who knows the outcome and is simply giving the process its necessary time to complete itself properly. Callum sent her a note at midday. The testimony was received. The documentation was entered. The committee voted to proceed. It moves to formal proceedings next week. The outcome is not in question. CV. She folded it, set it on the table, picked up her book. Couldn't read a single sentence? It's done, she thought. The part that was dangerous is done, which meant the part that came next was the other kind of dangerous. The kind that had nothing to do with followed footsteps or coercion letters or rings moved to the wrong finger. The kind that was dangerous in the way of sitting in a library with a man who looked at old paintings the way you looked at old paintings and asked what you wanted, without assuming. He already knew the answer. The kind that was dangerous in the way of things that had been building slowly and were now, with the external pressure removed, simply there. Present. Requiring a response. That kind of dangerous, she thought, is considerably harder to manage. He came to the library that evening. She heard his step before the door. His actual step, she knew it completely now. The particular rhythm of a man who moved with deliberate intention, who did not wander, who knew where he was going and went there. He came in, sat beside her. The fire had burned long enough to settle from its early brightness into serious, reliable warmth. Outside, the November dark pressed against the windows. Inside, the room had the quality of rooms that are genuinely inhabited, books that have been opened and read, a desk that holds real work, chairs that remember the shape of the people who use them. "It's done," Ren said. "The immediate part," Callum said. "Mar retains his title. He loses everything else that matters. Access. Influence. The web of obligation he spent 20 years constructing." A pause. "He'll leave London. His country estate, probably, which will be read in the rooms that matter, as the admission it is," she nodded. "Aldous?" she asked. "Retired. Pension intact. He left 3 days ago, quietly, as agreed." Callum paused. "He sent a letter. He asked me to tell you that the 9 years weighed on him every day, and that the way this ended was, his word, merciful." Ren looked at the fire. 9 years, she thought. And at the end of it, someone gave him a door instead of a wall. "He deserved a door," she said. "Yes," Callum agreed. "He did." The comfortable quiet, the kind she had come to associate with this specific room and this specific fire, and the specific quality of a man who did not fill silence with noise simply because silence existed. Ren. She looked at him, those eyes. Steady, in the way they were always steady, but open, in the way they were only here, only now, only in the library with the fire settled and the world outside managing its own affairs without them. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it correctly. Which means I'm going to take a moment." She waited. He took the moment. "When I kissed you in the corridor," he said, "it was a decision. A fractions of a second's calculation. There was a man coming. I needed cover. And you were there." "That is the truth." He paused. "And then I was standing in a servant's passage with a woman whose roses I had just destroyed, and instead of being frightened or outraged or even particularly inconvenienced, she was reading the tactical situation and telling me something I hadn't noticed." Another pause. "And I could not stop thinking about it." Ren said nothing, because this was the kind of thing that required the whole of it, before responding. "Through the ceremony," he said. "Through the reception. Through 10 days of a legitimate security crisis that I managed, but less efficiently than I would have without a significant portion of my concentration occupied elsewhere." He looked at her directly. No performance in it, no management. Just the man looking at her. "I have been composed for a very long time. Composed in public, composed in private. Composed in rooms where composure was the only thing that kept the situation from falling apart. I am good at it." A pause. "I am not indifferent. Those two things are not the same." "No," she said, quietly. "They're not. I want to know what this is," he said, "without making assumptions about what you want. Without the protection of professional distance, which we have both been using, I think, to avoid having to decide what happens when the task is complete." He held her gaze. "The task is complete." Ren looked at him, thought about 10 years of invisible rooms, thought about the third portrait in the East Gallery, thought about crushed roses and 30 seconds. "My father was a solicitor," she said. "My mother was the daughter of a Welsh schoolmaster. I have no title, no fortune, no family name that opens doors in the rooms you move through." She paused. "I am practical. I am direct. I will disagree with you when you're wrong, which will happen, because you are very capable but not infallible, and I will not soften the disagreement because your title makes silence seem like the easier choice." He didn't flinch, she continued. "I have spent 10 years being useful to people who did not notice the using. I am done with that. Not with being useful. I don't know how to be otherwise, and I wouldn't want to change it. But with the invisibility, with the arrangement that said, my value was in what I provided and not in who I was." She met his eyes. If you are interested in a woman who will exist quietly in the appropriate social position and require nothing inconvenient, I am the wrong choice. Callum held her gaze through all of it, without moving, without managing. If I wanted quiet, he said when she finished, I would have sent back a polite response to your first card and had nothing further to do with you after the corridor. A pause. I sent you an honest letter. I came to your garden room. I poured you tea with my own hands. I moved you into my house over your entirely reasonable objections because I could not tolerate the thought of you 12 streets away in a house that was compromised. He paused. Ren. Her name in his voice, with the full weight of someone who had been learning the shape of it since a corridor. I am telling you that I want exactly what you are, precisely and completely. Not despite any of it, the library was very still. She let it be still. Let the words have their full weight before she answered them. Then she said, yes. One word. He exhaled, the most unguarded sound she had ever heard from him. A single breath released, carrying the quality of something held for a very long time in a chest that had learned to hold things without complaint. He reached across the space between them, took her hand, not urgently, not dramatically, with the same deliberate certainty he brought to everything. As if he had decided, and the decision was real, and there was no version of this moment in which he did not do exactly this. His hand was warm. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and Callum Vance lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles. Not a social gesture, something private. Something that had nothing to do with convention and everything to do with meaning exactly what it appeared to mean, without decoration and without apology. His eyes stayed on hers. She held on. He proposed 3 weeks later, after the formal proceedings had concluded, after Mar had retreated to his country estate, after Aldous Frey had sent a second letter. This one addressed simply to Ren, which said only, thank you for the door. Weeks of evenings in the library. 3 weeks of notes that had begun as information sharing and become, gradually, something else entirely. The specific, unhurried correspondence of two people who were in the same building, and still found things worth writing down for each other. 3 weeks of the machinery of the investigation winding down and the space it left behind filling with something that had no machinery at all. Just presence. The chosen, continuous, uncomplicated presence of two people who had decided to stop moving to opposite ends of the room. He didn't arrange it, didn't plan a dramatic gesture or a formal setting, didn't consult anyone or prepare the ground. He just sat down beside her one evening and said, I want to present you to the court, not as a companion, not as an associate. As the woman I've chosen, a pause, the first genuinely uncertain pause she had ever heard from him, the real kind. If you'll have me, the library was very still. She thought about the corridor. 3 seconds and crushed roses. A beginning she hadn't planned and hadn't been able to stop happening from the inside, the way certain things happened from the inside, whether or not you had given them permission. She thought about the portrait gallery. 2 people looking at a neglected painting, neither knowing the other was there, both looking at the same thing for the same reason, because caring about whether things were properly maintained was simply who they were. She thought about 10 years of invisible rooms, and this room. And the man in it. You're proposing in the library, she said. Is that a problem? No, she looked at him. It's very you. The corner of his mouth moved. Ren, he said, her actual name, her full name, in the voice that had been learning the shape of it since a corridor and a basket, and 30 seconds and no plan. Will you marry me? She looked at him for a long moment. Let it be a long moment, not because she was uncertain, because some things deserved the full weight of their moment, and this was one of them. This was the kind of moment you did not rush through on your way to what came next, because this was what came next.
This was it.
Yes, she said. He kissed her. Not like the corridor. The corridor had been controlled, deliberate. A decision made in a fraction of a second for reasons that had nothing to do with wanting and everything to do with necessity. That kiss had been a strategy, a cover, a calculation that happened to include her. This was none of those things. This was a man who had stopped managing himself for long enough to simply be present. Entirely, without calculation, with the woman he was choosing. Not with the part of himself that assessed risk and managed outcomes and kept the composure that kept everything intact. With the part that had seen a woman in a portrait gallery before he knew her name. looking at the same thing he was looking at, with the same quiet, practical attention that he had never, before this, found in another person. He held on. She held on. The fire settled in the grate. Outside, the world continued in its beautiful, indifferent way. Carriages on distant roads, a night wind through November trees, the ordinary business of a world that did not stop for any private moment, however significant it felt from the inside. Inside the library, nothing was indifferent at all. The formal presentation to court happened on a Thursday morning in late November, Thornmere's Great Hall. Full attendance. The ceiling above them had witnessed more social calculations than any other room in the country. More positioning, more quiet reassessment, more rapid arithmetic of consequence and connection, and what it all meant for everyone individually. Today it would witness something else. Ren wore deep blue, her own choice, over the suggestions of 3 separate people who had opinions about what a future Duchess should present to court, all 3 of whom she had thanked politely and ignored completely. Deep blue, simply cut, with no ornamentation that wasn't structural, the dress of a woman who had chosen it herself and was aware that it suited her and had no particular interest in anyone else's opinion on the matter. Callum stood beside her, composed, unshakable, exactly himself in every room he had ever entered. He introduced her in a voice the entire assembled court could hear, not as Lady Dunmore's companion, not as a distinguished acquaintance, as Ren Calloway. The woman he had chosen, the future Duchess of Aldenmere. The room absorbed it. She watched the calculations run across 100 faces, the positioning, the reassessment, the rapid social arithmetic of people working out what this meant for their own places in the order of things, the way rooms full of important people always reconfigured around a new reality. She had spent 10 years watching those calculations from the outside, from the companions' gallery, from the table near the east window, from the invisible position of someone whose job was to observe and manage, and never to be observed or managed. This was different. This time she was inside. This time the room was arranging itself around her. This is what the foreground feels like, she thought. This specific feeling of taking up exactly the space you are standing in and not apologizing for it, Lady Dunmore. Across the hall was beaming with an enthusiasm that had no interest whatsoever in propriety and was entirely, completely genuine. Lord Dunmore was shaking Callum's hand with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had chosen correctly when tested and was quietly glad of it. Around them, the court did what courts always did. It rearranged itself around a new reality and pretended it had expected it all along. Ren looked at the room from its center. She was not invisible. She was not managing someone else's life from the background of every room she entered. She was here, fully, specifically, without apology, and she was choosing it. The same way she had chosen to look at the 3rd portrait in a gallery when she could have kept walking, the same way she had chosen to turn in a corridor when she could have stayed pressed against the wall, the same way she had chosen, every day for 10 days and then 3 weeks, and then all the days that came after, to keep looking at exactly what was in front of her. Callum, she said. Low, just for him, yes, you still owe me roses. He turned to look at her, those eyes, steady, warm in the way she had come to know, the warmth that existed underneath the composure, the warmth that had cost him something to have built over and cost him nothing. Now, to show her, I will order an entire garden of them, he said. She almost smiled, then she let it happen, the whole thing. No catching, no managing, no redirecting. Just the smile, present and real, in the grandest hall in the country, in front of a court that had expected many things of the Duke of Aldenmere's future wife, and had not expected this, had not expected her. And the man who controlled every room he entered looked at her the way he had looked at nothing else on a Tuesday morning in autumn in an east-facing gallery, like she was the specific thing, the one specific thing. In a world that was, otherwise, full of general impressions, she looked back, completely visible, entirely present, exactly where she chose to be, which was, she understood now, had understood, maybe, since a corridor and a basket and 30 seconds that rearranged something fundamental in both of them. Not a small thing at all, it was everything, and she had chosen it. Every single step of the way.